This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the March 16th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, joined, as we've been joined so frequently lately, by special guest Jonathon Kinchen and always, basically the bedrock of the show, DRF formulator himself, Mike Hogan. How are you doing today, boys?
I'm doing great.
Good as always.
Jonathan?
Yeah, looking forward to a little pick six carryover action tomorrow at Santa Anita, and then of course the Ultimate Betting Challenge gets rolling on Saturday. So I'm feeling a little bit like Christmas Eve.
That is a good point. There are two huge things coming up. And for folks who don't know, most people listening to the show probably do know all about the Ultimate Betting Challenge, but we'll put in a plug for it straight away at the beginning of the show, because if you're a contest player or if you're just a cash player who plays with a somewhat heavy bankroll, we've got this contest happening at both Gulfstream and Santa Anita this weekend. It's a $4,500 buy-in. You've missed your opportunity to qualify via drfqualify.com. We had a really successful run. We punched in, I think, something like 51 entries from DRFQ for this $4,500 buy-in, but it's not too late. If you contact Nancy Berry at Gulfstream or Nate Newby at Santa Anita, they can get you sorted out. I'm pretty sure in both places you can even show up day of with cash, but just to make sure, give those contest directors a heads up a day or two in advance so they can know to plan on you and make sure you get your payment in. And this contest, Jonathan, I don't think I'm hyperbolizing too much when I describe it as potentially a third major behind the National Handicapping Championship and the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Agree?
No, I absolutely agree. In fact, I even had a conversation that those two are our championship events, and this has become the most important of the regular season. So, without a doubt, yeah, I think it's going to be a big turnout. A lot of the tournament players I've talked to are either going to Santa Anita or to Gulfstream. I think it's going to be a really big prize pool. It's a live money tournament, and in my opinion, like a really great time of the year. It kind of works perfectly, in accordance with the other ones, and so I think it's going to be really good. I think they're going to have a really good turnout. The qualifiers, like you said, the feeders have done really well, sending 3 people, 6 people a weekend, 3 people a day for almost, I feel like, the last 3 or 4 weeks of the qualifier. So I think it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it.
It should be pointed out that of those 51 entries, the man on the phone here, Jonathan, won 2 of them. But let's take yourself out of the equation for a second. Pretend you are playing from a neutral site, and the contest players you've talked to, the ones who are going to Gulfstream, the ones who are going to Santa Anita, give me a line on which site is more likely to produce the winner. Are we going to see an Ultimate Betting Championship Challenge champion from Santa Anita or from Gulfstream?
Well, I have to say Santa Anita. I feel like the room and the table I'm going to be sitting at is going to have a pretty good shot at it. We'll be hanging out with Duke Matisse, who won Santa Anita's tournament prior. I'll be hanging out with a lot of other guys that have had a lot of really good experiences and good results out in California. Here's what I will say is a lot of the East Coast guys obviously travel to all these events and do really well on them. But from what I have seen, there's just more West Coast live money handicapping contests than there is East Coast. Just because, Naira has always been a mythical $2 win place. Monmouth is typically a low-level, cash tournament situation. And so if I had to guess, I would guess with one of those guys. I'm sure Dennis DeCower and some of those guys, and Christian Helmers and a lot of those other guys that will be on the West Coast have had a lot of good experience, good results in those tournaments. So I would expect they would probably come from the West Coast.
It's official. Paul Sherman and John Nichols have crossed you off their holiday card list.
Well, I did forget about my man John Nichols. If there's going to be an East Coast guy, I'm going to call it now. It'll be one of those two.
I love it. Well, it's going to be fun, and that's a good point you make about sort of contest culture in different parts of the country, and particularly because of all the great work they've done at Santa Anita over the years in the contest space with Tom Quigley and Nate Newby. They are the leading lights in terms of live bankroll contests. Of course, special shout out to Jim Goodman at Keeneland as well for the work he's done. But with the rumors I'm hearing, East Coast players may not have to wait too long before they get some bigger bankroll live money or live bankroll stuff themselves. So that could be coming to a racetrack near you, East Coast racing fans, in addition to what's happening at Gulfstream, talking about the Northeast now, of course. But we'll have to see what happens. But our friends at Monmouth might have something to say about this. But all right, enough contest talk. Let's talk about what we saw last weekend. Jonathan and I were fortunate enough to be live at Santa Anita. Mike, were you able to watch and or catch up on the action from Santa on Saturday?
Yeah, I watched most of it live, save for some of the earlier races prior to the stakes. But as far as the stakes races go, I watched all of them live.
The big cap was, as we said on the show last weekend, and maybe a little bit more like the little cap this year. And we had this interesting situation in the paddock, which I clued into right away. And I don't know how widely it was reported before the race, but you took one look at FNX walking around that paddock in Santa Anita, and he just didn't look like himself. There was something going on. I didn't know what it was. I just described it as something going on with his coat. And I have no inside information on this, but I think it was almost the kind of thing where had he not shipped across the country to run in a glorified allowance race for $1 million, he might not have even run in the race. Not that there was anything wrong with him in terms of that it was dangerous to run, but he just clearly didn't look like himself. What are we hearing, Mike, about what was going on with him and how he's been doing since?
Well, I know about an hour prior to the race, Steve Anderson tweeted out a post from DRF Live that I believe was free. So if you were following DRF Live on Saturday, you would have seen his post saying that about 90 minutes prior to the race, the state vets examined FNX and gave approval. And it was about of hives. It was also documented in photo by a great shot from Barbara Livingston that if you wanted to see, if you haven't seen, you can find on her Twitter account. It came out a little bit, certain sources prior to the race were talking about it. But you're right, if you were not paying attention, if you were not in the paddock like you were, Pete, if you weren't really following those sources on Twitter or online or on DRF Live, you might have missed the fact that this big favorite in the $1 million race was potentially not 100%.
And of course, the trouble is, it's all well and good for me to sit there and tell Jonathan, who I think was sitting 4-4 in the pick six at that time, well, I think you're going to be okay here. I don't think this heavy favorite's going to win. It's quite another matter to actually be able to pick the winner. In this case, the winner was Melatonin, trained by David Hoffman. Jonathan, what did we miss? How did we not come up with this 20-1 shot?
Man, I don't know. I tell you what, though, I think it's a good time for us to say that congratulations to our man Frank Marimati for absolutely nailing that call of Melatonin.
Oh yeah.
If I would have thought about it, I would have used the horse just so that I could root for Frank to have an opportunity to get that call. I don't know. It's just one of those times, I think, sometimes where, if I'm being completely honest, I look at a race and I fall in love with 2 to 3 to 4 other horses, and I just downgrade other horses because of my affection for the other 4 that I just mentioned. I thought Donworth was sitting on a huge race. I thought General A-Rod was sneaky, and I thought that if I was wrong about all of that, that Imperative was going to win. And so when I got to Melatonin in my handicapping, all the things that come out negative initially, they become magnified to me at that point because of my affection for other horses. And it's something that I have to work on in my game. And to be honest, he wasn't even on my radar. And looking back on it, he should have been. But I guess just some of the mistakes we make in this game.
Mike, you were closer than either of us when we did this race. We broke this race down on Friday. You had the idea of going with the big price over the shorter prices. But did you give this horse much count?
Well, I looked at him a little bit mostly from a pace factor standpoint. I thought him and Donworth would be on or near the lead in a race that didn't look like it had a whole lot of early speed. So That said, I was not betting him to win, and I was not expecting him, as a Kodiak Cowboy out of a Yankee Victor mare, who primarily was a sprinter and at best a bit of a mediocre one at that, trying his a two-turn race for the second time in his career, going 10 furlongs against, albeit not the strongest grade one we've seen in a long time, but certainly a graded stakes caliber field. I was a little dubious about his chances, but boy, he set fast early fractions under Joe Talamo. Joe wanted the lead from the gate. Clearly that was the plan. And not only that, he pulled away late. He ran fastest opening quarter and fastest closing quarter, which is a sign of a legitimate racehorse. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. The line Jonathan was referring to before, by the way, for those out there who didn't hear it, on this wire-to-wire win, Melatonin puts him to sleep in the big cap, which was pretty fantastic stuff. I'll admit, I gave Frank a high five when I saw him. I think he's hopefully put himself in a. It's a multiple. The Santa Anita announcer thing. It's a multiple choice test with no wrong answer. But boy, I think he may have just won himself a job. We'll have to see what happens in the coming weeks as far as that goes. You mentioned Donworth. Donworth was my pick in the race. Donworth had a little bit of an adventure, let's just say, in the running here. Jonathan, have you read anything or heard anything more? Is this an instance where I half expected to hear that they used the wrong bit or the bridle was fraying or something, or was this a case where maybe we were dealing with a little bit of rider error?
I don't know. I mean, we talked about it. I try not to be overcritical of jockeys, even though I am sometimes overcritical of jockeys. I just thought he had the horse in a bad place. The horse surely wasn't cooperating and relaxing into that spot. We see horses all the time that are in spots like that will just shut off, and we call that a great pocket trip. Well, Donworth didn't do that, and I think it's fair to say that Mario didn't do anything to help him do that. And I guess the next time he runs will be the determination of whether or not that was a bad ride or not. I wasn't crazy about the position the horse was put in, but like I said, the horse didn't do anything to help.
Somebody asked me, would Donworth have won the race? And I said, well, you just can't even say. It's just, this is the kind of trip. It's not like I'm going to look at whatever figure he got and said, okay, well, the trouble cost him 10 Beyer speed figure points. This is the kind of race that I just completely would put a line through and would look at the horse the same way as if he didn't have the race the next time he appears. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, and I will say that after the race, Doug O'Neill came out and took the blame for the performance, did not blame Mario Gutierrez at all, said that he maybe didn't have him training well enough coming up to the race and second start off of a long layoff. That may have been Doug O'Neill backing up his main rider there. And I don't know if 100% of the blame really falls on Mario. I will agree he didn't have him in the best spot, and I will agree he tried to go through an opening that did not exist on the backstretch prior to the second turn. That said, it looked like Donworth, to me, never really wanted to settle, was kind of, I wouldn't go so far as to say rank, but was fighting a little bit.
He was pretty rank, I think.
Yeah.
Running up on heels, and like Jonathan said, he never shut off. I mean, I think I guess it's borderline rank compared to some of the rank we see, but it was, it's just very hard for me in a race where, a horse wants his head, and you have a race that's won wire to wire by a 20-1 shot, so why not give the 3-1 shot his head?
Well, and I think this is where you have a case where it's maybe the jockey, or I'm sure with partly instructions from Doug O'Neill, on a horse who's relatively lightly raced. It was just his 6th career start for Donworth. He'd never gone 10 furlongs. It was the second start as a 4-year-old. And he debuted as a spring 3-year-old. So this is not a horse that had a ton of foundation under him, and going the furthest he'd ever gone, maybe they were thinking, look, we don't want him to run off because we need him to run all 10 furlongs here, so let's try and get him to sit second or third early, and obviously, to me, it seemed like Donworth resented that tactic, and shoulda, coulda, woulda, I guess.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. Jonathan, any final thoughts on any of the other performers out of the big cap before we move on and talk about some 3-year-olds?
No, I thought General A-Rod was pretty bad. I mean, I know that I was probably the only one of the three of us that thought he was going to run well. I just, I guess my angle on the horse was that this was the first time that it felt like Todd kind of had the horse, was leading into like a performance, not on the turf, so it felt like maybe it was the first time they were going to get him kind of going the right direction. Hindsight being 2020, the horse shipped out there because it wasn't a great field, and they thought they might steal it, and it appears he just wasn't good enough. So, you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, that sounds about right. For me, the race and coming up with to answer that question I asked you guys about the winner. Once I saw FNX, if I had gone back and made an odds line, I think Melatonin probably would have been a clear overlay. But up to that point, when talking about the race, when we talked about it on Friday, I thought he was tricky to come up with. I want to go back and watch Imperative's trip and see if there was anything there. I mean, he's kind of a horse he's a horse I like to hit the board in a lot of these not so great California older stakes races. Did either of you guys see anything with Imperative before we leave this one?
And I didn't see anything necessarily in his trip, but my concern with Imperative is I don't know if he wants 10 furlongs. I don't know if he's a BC Classic type. He might be more of a miler. 9 is maybe his limit, and certainly 9 at Charlestown, take notice. But for me, that was more the concern with Imperative as kind of a grinder. I think he does his best grinding at a little bit shorter than the 10 furlongs.
All right, let's move around and talk about some 3-year-old races. We'll stay right in Southern California for the San Whomever Stakes that was on the big cap undercard. What were your reactions, Jonathan? Did we see the Derby winner last Saturday?
I don't know if we saw the Derby winner. I mean, I think the Candy ran really, really well. It's hard for me sometimes, even when I feel like horses go fast and set fast fractions and finish at Santa Anita, because if you pick your trip at Santa Anita, I don't care where you're going or how fast you're going, it's kind of the trip you want. You just want the inside trip. You want no dirt in your face, and you just want to run them off their feet, because sometimes it's hard to make up ground there. So even when horses run well in fast fractions, sometimes I'm scared to give them too much credit for that. With that being said, I thought More Spirit probably ran the best race. Outside of that, if you want to find someone who didn't run, if you don't want to see that Danzing Candy did, I thought More Spirit was up close early to quick fractions, and finished really well, galloped out well, in a race that it just didn't feel like he really needed to win that race based on his previous performances, and I just think that Bob might just kind of have him going in the right direction. I thought Exaggerator was flat. I mean, I know he made that big run on the backside, and I think a lot of people that do trip notes and tag him into their formulator stuff will probably have a big middle move trip note there. But I think it was kind of dressed up, and I'm not sure if I really want him going forward.
It was very strange. When I watched the replay to that race, I fully expected to see Exaggerator walk out of the gate and, put off poorly 4 lengths in my formulated trip note. And it really just wasn't the case. He didn't really break that badly. He just had no speed. He just kind of got run off his heels. And I don't know what to make of it, because it wasn't a resting visual move, but he kind of didn't run it all at the beginning and didn't run it all at the end, and that's not really what I'm looking for for my Derby winner in a Triple Crown prep race. Mike, what did you think of the top 3 here, and what did you think of the race in general?
Well, I'll tell you this about Exaggerator. He's the horse that I picked in Public Handicapper and thought was the most likely winner. After the race, and maybe even going into the race, Keith DeSormo had said he thought maybe a mile was the limit for Exaggerator. He's actually come out. He did. He's actually come out since the race. In Jay Privman's recap, he said, I think he's going to be a miler, but hopefully, but we're going to send him to the Santa Anita Derby, and maybe he'll prove me wrong. So,
wow.
Hold on 1 second. Let me log into my formula in case I forget. There's no way in heck I'm betting any money on that horse ever again longer than a mile.
Yeah. So, and in Bradfree, we did a webinar on Thursday about the big cap card, and Bradfree hinted at the same sort of thing, that Keith DeSormo really saw this as more of a 7 furlongs to a miler, or maybe a one-turn miler at best, who is, of course, caught up in the Derby trail now. So we'll see. And certainly trainers have been proven wrong before, but I had to take notice when I heard that, and so I even though I going into the race thought he was the most likely winner, I certainly didn't see him as a slam dunk. And coming out of the race and what we all saw, I think it kind of validates the point that Keith is trying to make.
How about Danzing Candy? Do we have any other equivalent tidbits? Normally I read all of our guys' stuff. It's been a little hard for me this week being on the road. I haven't done the normal amount of it was so much more involved on Saturday. I figured that maybe freed me from doing as much work, but now I'm feeling really bad that I missed that. That's fantastic. Any equivalents on either More Spirit or Danzing Candy from the pages of Daily Racing Form?
Not really. I mean, the takeaway from Danzing Candy in his previous 3 starts, he didn't really break running. On Saturday, he did for the first time, and you saw what happened. He kind of ran them off their heels, certainly ran the front runners off their heels early, and then still had enough late to hold off the late run from More Spirit, and never really looked like a loser at any point in the race. I think he's good. I don't know if he's going to be able to wire the field in the Kentucky Derby, but I do think that this is a stronger Derby prep than what we've seen in some of the other Derby preps recently, say at Gulfstream or even at Aqueduct. Even though it was a short field, I think it was a good field, and I think the top 2 are the ones to take out of this race.
Yeah, that seems very logical. The disappointment of the race, who shows you what I know, blew me away in the paddock, and then proceeded to not run a step. Smoky Image, is that his name?
Smoky Image.
What happened there, Jonathan? Did you see anything when you went back and did your trips for that race?
No. Well, I haven't done it. I haven't done that full trip yet. But no, I just didn't. I didn't think he wanted the lead. He didn't get the lead, and it just fell apart.
Yeah.
So here's my take on Smoky Image. I think if this horse had run 3 years ago, he would have been probably 2 or 3 times the price he was on Saturday. But because of a horse like California Chrome, he gets a lot more attention. This is a horse trying open company for the first time as a 3-year-old. This is a horse moving not just up in class, but way up in class, running against some legitimate Triple Crown contenders. And, people see that he's 6 for 6 and he's winning by open lengths and he's a Calbred, and they think, oh, he's the next California Chrome. Well, every horse has got to be taken on their own merits, and because of California Chrome, I think he just got a little overbet.
Yeah, that doesn't sound unreasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I know Mike's big on using the Moss Pace figures, and looking back at Smoky Image, his 2 big wins going wire to wire had negative race shapes, and with the Moss Pace figures, and that obviously you can probably hop back into some of Mike's past webinars to learn a little bit more about those figures and how they work, but essentially that just suggests that he got fairly easy leads before, and that obviously wasn't the case on Saturday.
Yeah, that'll often make a very big difference. Now, I feel bad. Which one was it? Which sand was this that we saw over the weekend?
Felipe.
San Felipe.
I always get the mix up, and then I punt and make my San whomever joke. But that's very unprofessional hosting. I should have said San Felipe. And it wasn't the only Derby prep race on Saturday. There was one on the other side of the country, back at Tampa Bay Downs, and a figure who'd been a little bit quiet thus far on the Triple Crown Trail emerged with a potent 1-2 punch. I'm talking, of course, about Todd Pletcher. Mike, do we think Todd Pletcher finally has horses who are going to give him a shot to make an impact on this year's Kentucky Derby Trail?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure what to make of the race.
Fence. Get off that fence.
Sure, they looked pretty good, and they were by far the two best horses in this race. I don't know if it's going to translate away from Tampa Bay Downs, where Destin has run two really good races and set a track record on Saturday in winning the Tampa Bay Derby. And certainly Outwork in his third start of his career and his first around 2 turns almost kept up with him, and they looked pretty good, but I was way against Brody's cause. The ones we were taking a shot with, and Outwork both just really got the trip and beat up on inferior fields, and I don't know if it's going to translate against the rest of the 3-year-olds in the first Saturday in May. That said, it was impressive visually, at least, and the buyer figure was 100, which is equal to Danzing Candy and the top 3-year-old performance 2 turns, co-top 3-year-old performance 2 turns so far this year. So that's why I say maybe.
Jonathan, let me ask you. Maybe we can get you off the fence in one way or the other. Is Destin Todd Pletcher's best shot at winning the Kentucky Derby?
I mean, if he is, he won't have my money on him. It's just one of those nondescript races where it's like, oh, okay. I mean, he just kind of had a cool trip, and he was a little wide in the first turn, and then he just finished, and no one was really making up any ground. It's like that's just. And he's going to be bet next time. I mean, maybe depending on where they go with him and who they run him against, but he's going to get money. And he's just one. He'll have to prove it to me. And if I ever get on his side, it will just have to be Derby Day. But anything before that, he'll just have to beat me. The same with Outwork. The same feeling with Outwork.
Let me put it this way. Prior to the race, I didn't think the Kentucky Derby winner was in this field. And so I don't know if I saw enough to have my opinion changed.
Well, let me ask you guys both the same question. Oh, Jonathan, you had something to add on that point?
Well, just 2 interesting things that I found kind of tricky that you might want to at least consider or follow moving forward. It's like I'm not really sure why Johnny, I believe, rode Destin before this, right?
Johnny did ride Destin last start, although Javier rode him in the 2 prior starts.
Okay, so maybe there's nothing there. I thought that was a little bit interesting when I saw it. Maybe I thought that his Johnny's relationship with Rapoli might have influenced where he was. But what I did think is like you guys said, I think Brody's cause ran poorly, but with an excuse off of a layoff, and you have to feel that Dale didn't feel it was going to be necessary to have the horse fully cranked for this spot. But I still support and am interested in Pete and I's selection of Tail Saval. I thought he made a huge run on the far turn and just kind of flattened out late and understandably. So
like a short horse, maybe?
Yeah, I'd like to see him back. I would hope and pray that he doesn't show up in the Florida Derby because I'm not sure he's going to have a chance there. But maybe get him down to Louisiana or ship him over to Keeneland or maybe even up for the Wood. I think he'd have a better shot of getting some points. And he's the type of horse I would absolutely love to see get in the gate for the Derby. And he'd be one of those 40-to-1 shots that could definitely get involved at a price.
I wonder if it's not going to be one of those years where my sort of Derby bet is on 2 or 3 horses at prices along the lines of what Jonathan's saying. But you got to make the gate first. The way these rules work, and Taylor Saval's going to have to do some running, right? Even to make it to that final 20.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's pointless at this point. I mean, I know he had that impressive maiden win, but I think he's pointless at this point. So he would definitely have to do that. I know that those Silks, if we can remember, those Silks has produced a bomb or 2 lately. A Golden Soul, I think, was Charles Tipke horse.
That's right.
That's right.
There was another one, wasn't there? Did Tipke have another? I'm spacing on the other horse I'm trying to think of, but I think.
Well, Dallas Stewart had. I think Dallas Stewart had both of them. Maybe that's
Commanding Curve. Was Commanding Curve 50 as well?
He was West Point.
Yeah, of course.
What about?
I feel bad for my friends at West Point that I forgot their horse there that ran second in the Derby for a second. Don't tell Bellhouse, okay?
Well, and did 50 ever have a Derby winner? Or am I getting him mixed up with another, like John Oxley or something?
Folks listening, this is why you're supposed to do your research before the show. But we are strewn about different parts of the country here, so we hope you'll give us a pass and/or tell us what idiots we are on Twitter later. But
I'm sure they will.
My fear about Taylor Sewell was I was worried he'd be too keyed up. I wanted to see him sort of settle and pounce. He maybe settled a little bit too much for the purposes of the bet last Saturday. But I agree with Jonathan's point. I think in terms of setting him up for future development, that's probably what you want to see. So losing bet, but definitely a horse I'm sticking on the follow list. Is there anybody else we want to make notes of out of this Tampa Bay Derby with an eye towards the future of this racing season?
I mean, I wouldn't completely ignore Brody's Cause based on that bad performance. That horse has shown some ability as a 2-year-old, and when you get to Dale Roman's home court, I would imagine that he'll kind of find his way and could be one that could be considered for sure.
How about you, Mike? Anything else to add on that one?
No, the only thing I'd say about Brody's Cause is, he's run well when he's gotten his pace set up in his advantage, because he's going to need some pace to run at. And if that happens again and he gets a favorable setup, I think he's a talented horse. But those stone closers are ones at short prices that I usually don't like to rely on, especially in a race like the Derby. I would rather take a stone closer at a big price if I'm going to do so.
Well, I can't find the other horse that I was thinking of that was 50 owned, but I can tell you that in 2013 he was inducted into the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame. So there's that.
All right, good research there, Pete.
I love this Google machine thing. It's fantastic. All right, so that's the story with those prep races. I wanted to do a little bit of talk about wagering strategy. Last Friday on the show, we started to get into talking a little bit about wagering strategy, and specifically related to a Twitter conversation we had last week. And there was a topic, it was a tangent we almost went off on, but we were running out of time. So I wanted to revisit that today. And it's this idea that the best way, especially for a smaller bankroll player, to sort of approach his or her wagering is with the idea that you always want to bet a little to win a lot, or at least when you're starting out. That idea of getting, you're not investing much and you're getting an outsized return. It sounds very logical. I know Jonathan has an opinion on the topic, but we're gonna hold him off, and I'm just gonna talk to Mike about if that idea is something that factors into the way he approaches his betting strategy. Bet a little to win a lot. Does that sound right?
Yes, but with a little bit of a caveat. I don't know. I wouldn't say that this is the sort of approach you'd want to take when you're just starting out, because what ends up happening, in order to bet a little to win a lot, you have to be playing against some short price favorites in order to win a lot. Because if you're betting a little in, say, pick twos or pick threes or doubles or even win bets on shorter prices, you're not going to win a lot if you're only betting a little. So you have to be able to tolerate the droughts that might come with your $10 pick four not coming through because you tossed one or two shorter priced horses that ends up beating you. So I would say, as long as you're okay with that, and as long as you're also going through and either in the win pool or in the exacta pool, hammering to whatever definition you would use of hammering. For some people that's a $20 win bet, some people it's a $5 win bet, but some people it's 1,000. Yeah, exactly.
Being aggressive with whatever units you're playing.
Exactly.
Identify what that is, and that's hammering when you bet your 5-unit bet or whatever.
Exactly. Back it up with those win bets or exacta bets or less risky bets that will help your bankroll maintain while you're still at the same time trying to win a lot from betting a little, if that makes sense.
I think there's some sense to that. Now, Jonathan, in your time in the game, you've become known not as somebody who bets a little to win a lot, certainly not as somebody who bets a lot to win a little, but I would describe it as bet a lot to win a lot. Would you agree with that characterization? And why do you not adhere to the bet a little, win a lot philosophy?
Well, not as of late. I've been bet whatever I bet and lose whatever I bet. But yeah, it's one of those deals where my comfort zone is in identifying scenarios in which I can get 5, 6, 7 to 1, rather than scenarios where I can get 30, 40 to 1. And the way that I work, I prefer to see the ball go through the hole a little bit more often than not, or I just get into a bad place mentally and I don't feel like I'm nearly as sharp or do as well. So I just need to see the ball go through the hole more, and so that's why I'm more comfortable identifying situations in which I can get 5 to 1 or 7 to 1. For instance, on a pick 4 sequence where a lot of guys would say, "Oh, it's chalky, I'm not interested." I am interested, but I'll try to have the pick 4 for $20 or $40 or whatever, and it'll be a 1x2 by 1x2, and I'll do it for $25 or something.
You're talking about these in terms of the odds, but I think what's really interesting about what you're saying is how it reflects the implied probability. Not to get too mathematical, but think of it this way: if you're listening, the idea is that those 30 to 1 scenarios have whatever, a 2 to 3% or 3% chance of happening, whereas Jonathan's, let's say 4 to 1 to make the math easy on me, you're talking about something that's going to happen 20% of the time. You're going to when you have a 20% chance of something, that's going to happen a whole lot more than when you have a 3% chance of something. Is that what you're getting at here?
Right, and if you can be disciplined in your selection of those 20%, that 20% strike rate, so you're not necessarily gonna miss the other 4 times. If you're specific and calculated in making those selections, and then you bet enough money in those scenarios, and you can have a positive ROI.
Yeah, for me, value is value, and it's hard in horse racing because you don't see these situations that you see in sporting events very often. But there are times in a sporting event where I think a certain outcome is maybe in tennis or in American sports while the games are going on, where something is 90% likely to happen. So if I can get paid as if it's 80%, if I can get if I can get 1 to 4 there, I'm happy. I'll take that. And at the same time, it's always a lot more fun if you have something that you think, let's say there's a horse that you think is 6 to 1 to win a race, and you can get 20 to 1. That's a lot more fun. That's a lot easier to say to the people next to you, I just made this bet. Those kind of chalk-sucking bets I'm describing that come up occasionally in other markets, they're not ones you're going to be bragging about. But to me, value is value, and I don't care if that's taking a big price that I think should be short. It's just always about taking a price. The odds are worth taking based on the probability of the event occurring, and I don't care if that's bet a little to win a lot or bet a lot to win a little. I think getting too focused on that is looking at the world the wrong way. For me, for the way I approach gambling, I just want value wherever it lies. Do you think I'm setting myself up for trouble here, or do you guys see the logic in that?
I'll jump in. I see the logic in that. The problem for me in my approach is I don't know if I slice it that finely. I don't know if I will say, this horse is a 50% likely winner, and so therefore if I'm getting, X amount of return, it's worth a bet. That's not kind of how I approach it because with my bankroll, it's not large enough for me to put enough of a win bet in order to make a decent amount of money based on my risk. What I would rather do, and one of the things that I love to do, is using a bet like the pick 3 to lock in value. And I'll give you an example of how I do it. Many times we've seen horses that on the morning line are, say, 8 to 1, but we know are probably going to go off shorter than that, maybe even half of that. in the pick three, if you can get alive to them, you often get higher than the actual win odds in the pools because people are betting to some extent in those multi-race wagers off of the morning lines. And an example that I've used in the past, I think on the show, is I had a pick three where I went, I don't know, $8, 2 by 4 by 1 to Lady Eli on the day of her debut. She wasn't even the favorite in the pick threes. She was not the lowest. The other Chad Brown runner that day was a lower paying pick three, but in the win pool, she was a really, really legitimate favorite. And if I had waited and said, I really like this horse and I want to put 10 to win or 20 to win, I wasn't going to get the 3 to 1, 4 to 1, or whatever it was that she was on the morning line. I was going to have to take the 3 to 2 that I was given in the live money win pool. And even in the doubles, you can kind of get a sense of who's taking money because people have visibility into those pools. But in a bet like the pick three, you don't. You can't go 3 legs deep to see who's playing as the favorite, and that's one of the ways I like to try and build value.
That makes sense. I mean, I think that's a time-honored tradition that still seems the case. Do you agree, Jonathan, that if you can find that bad morning line horse, that bad morning line ain't going to fool anybody in the win pool, but you can maybe slice a little bit of value, turn the situation into a positive expectation when you can get live to that horse in the pick three? Is that something you ever try to do?
Yeah, kind of, and guys that have been around me a lot playing, I guess the mathematics of it are probably my weakest part. Like, not that I'm bad at math, but that's just not a part that I've focused on when I've kind of been developing my game. And so, man, a lot of times I just identify the horses that I like and the sequences that I like them in, and then I bet them accordingly based on the amount of money I'm willing to wager at the time. And so a lot of times, a lot of that stuff.
He's got to mute their iPhone there.
Oh, is that going on?
Very professional today on the podcast.
It's on my computer though. That's why it's weird. I don't know how to. I'll have to turn it off. I'll figure it out. Give me a couple seconds.
Kinchen, popular as ever.
Yeah, well, it's my buddy Scott Shapiro. He's blowing me up about the tournament. I asked him for some help, and he's got all the answers. So I'll try to turn it off while I'm working. But anyways, one of the things I do like to do though is I like to take if there's a horse I'm willing to bet win on, I just always feel like in the multi-race bets you're going to get better than what you're going to get in the win pool. But yes, you have to be right about the other portions of it. But I think that in those situations when you can be right, you're going to make, like I've talked about before, you're going to crush their soul a little bit. You're going to make more money in those spots than you might deserve to, because they're usually going to be higher odds in the multis. And so it's always something that I've tried to do.
I feel like we're sort of coming full back to the conversation we had on Friday about the all button and when to play in certain pools. That's such a big topic that I think we should wait and do that one either on Friday or on a future show. But it's something to think about, and it's something if listeners want to tweet us their thoughts about. Why do you pick a certain pool over over a different pool? What are all the factors that go into why you're going to make a win bet versus a double versus a pick three? There's a lot of different ways to look at that question, and we'll tackle it next time on the show. So I wanted to close today's show. I want to bring back a feature that we only did it a few times, but we got some good feedback on it, called Tales from the Track. What Tales from the Track is essentially a ripoff of another podcast. My friends Gil Alexander and Chris Andrews. Gil does the Beating the Book pods. If you do gambling of any kind, you pretty much want to be listening to Gil's show. It's fantastic. He has a variety of guests. They break down NFL games. He has his preview stuff up now, which is fantastic. Takes a very analytics-oriented approach. It's really good stuff. And during the football season, the last couple of years, he and Chris Andrews, Chris has a long and storied career in the sports betting business. Grew up among gamblers in Pittsburgh, moved to Vegas to ply the trade legally, and actually just got a job at the South Point. He's moved from Reno back to Vegas, so that's good. That means he'll be in my orbit more. We'll get a chance to hang out. But he would just do on on the Beating the Book podcast would do these stories about just various times in his gambling career. They would make a fantastic book that hopefully someday somebody will publish. But I just had the idea, you know, racing, we meet all these characters and all this weird stuff happens. And we should appropriate that. And Mike told some of his stories, his sort of horse player origin story, and also stories about being on the owning and breeding side. Jonathan, we're going to get you to do one in the coming weeks. We'll allow you to come up with a topic. I told one about how how my partner and I brilliantly sold a champion horse before he was champion. But the story, and the reason I chose this for today is twofold. One, it's just a story that I don't think I've ever told either of you guys, and you're both my friends, and it's sort of a funny, you know, it's an important moment in my gambling development, so I just wanted to tell you. And it also ties into the Cheltenham Festival, which is happening right now and is one of the great racing things that I've ever experienced. Unfortunately, the last couple of years I haven't been able to go because we've had these contests at Santa Anita the same week. So it hurts my heart a little bit to not be there drinking pints and seeing my friends over there. But the first friend I made over there was a guy called the Giant. And I was Susan and I had finished a great day of racing at Cheltenham, and we were told there was this wise guy route behind the course up a hill to this pub called the Plough in the town of Prestbury, where a lot of racing people hang out. And it's since become one of my favorite places in the world. I actually had a pint there with Steve Anderson when I was at Cheltenham in December. But this was the first time I went. And of course, you know, it's getting dark, it's after the races, where I'm having a little bit of trouble finding my way around. Cheltenham, like a lot of English race meets, like a lot of American race meets, people like to party. People get a little silly. They get a little free. And so the first guy I asked for directions chose not to answer my question, and instead, commenting upon the multicolored long scarf I was wearing at the time, simply said, "Look, it's Doctor Who," and kept walking. So he wasn't going to help me find the Plough. So then the next guy who comes by had quite an impressive figure. He was 7 feet tall. Even in the dim light, I could see that he had about a millimeter of orange hair. He was not only tall, he was extremely wide and broad-shouldered. This is the man who became known as the Giant, or was already known as the Giant. And not only did he tell me how to get to the Plough, he said, "Just follow me, I'm going there anyway." We got into the Plough. I bought him a pint. Giant was known then, probably now too, as somebody who sometimes had trouble putting his hand in his pocket to buy a drink. But once I had taken care of that little nicety for him, it was like we were instant friends. He was meeting a group of his pals there. These guys were, well, some of the guys in this group anyway, I think I can describe correctly as the Betfair millionaires. They were people who, I'm not sure actually if it was so much the ones that were there that day, but they were all connected to this circle of guys who in the early days of Betfair in the UK had made a killing largely betting on races as they were happening. In-running wagering is a crazy thing, very popular in the UK, wild to watch. And in the early days of it, there were a lot of inefficiencies, and you could do really well, and a lot of these guys did. Now, the Giant wasn't like that. He was old school, and he was like he was a proper handicapper, the USA sense of handicapper. Over there, they'd say form expert or something like that, of jump racing. He didn't really do the flat hardly at all, but he absolutely loved the jumps, and that's how he made his living. He was grinding out a working class type profit, but his job was to go to these race courses, make his paddock notes, he'd watch replays, he'd do all the things that we do, but on the equivalent of jump racing. And he very kindly took me under his wing a little bit and taught me a lot about what to look for in those races and how to approach them. And so we finished that trip to Cheltenham, and I stayed in touch with those guys. I actually ended up on a message board where a lot of those guys hung out. So, and there was a live chat feature. So every day I'd wake up, it'd be the afternoon there, and I'd be following along with their nonsense and giving tips, making fun of each other. It was a proto Twitter, I guess, but it was closed, so there was even more of a camaraderie there. Some of the folks on that message board have gone on to do some really cool things. One of them Kevin Blake works for At the Races in the UK and is actually part of the fantastic Final Furlong podcast, a show I've had the opportunity to be on. But the Giant, as I got to know him more and more, I could see, my sense of it is that as the old school guy, he was a little bit, it was a little bit frustrating for him grinding a small profit to see these other folks betting and running and making a killing. And I think he wanted to adapt his game to be a little bit more like them. Now for me, I came into this whole situation certainly aware that there were professional horse players. I had the pleasure to interview several of them for Six Secrets of Successful Bettors, but I never, I didn't ever think that it was something I could do, you know. And watching the Giant and following along and talking to these guys on, we called it the kitchen, the message board, I began to see that not only it was possible, but become convinced that, you know, if I applied the same discipline that these guys were doing, I could do the same thing. And so watching the Giant sort of struggle with where he was, he still remained somebody who I really looked to as, I had an office job at the time, and I just looked at his life and I found it very enviable, taking these trips all around England and doing all this cool stuff. So then one day, the Giant disappeared. Now he's okay as far as I know, but he just was no longer on the message board. He stopped returning emails. He stopped returning phone calls from anybody in that circle. And I think I've put together what happened, which is, it sounds like there was a horse he was sort of known to have a dislike for that was running in a race and not traveling at all in some, I wish I knew the specifics. It was probably, you know, some 3-mile chase at Sedgefield or whatever, and the thing's out back. And he had the opportunity, it sounded like he essentially laid maybe 1,000. He laid a price he shouldn't have laid in running. Basically, he gave somebody else 50 to 1 on this horse, thinking it should be 1,000 to 1 or more, thinking it had literally no chance. You probably can figure out the rest of the story. That thing, and probably slogging through the ground, everything else stopped. This thing, which was never traveling well, just grounded out, got to the front, and somebody had lost all their entire bankroll. You know, 1,000 at 50 to 1, talking about 50,000 pounds, that's a lot of money. And I think that what must have happened was that he was on the wrong end of that, and I don't know if it was like a 12-step situation, like you can't talk to the people who you talked to when you were part of the deal, or I don't know what happened, but I've not spoken to him since. There was a Giant sighting. He lived in Bristol, and somebody said they saw him at a bus stop within the last couple of years. So, and he'd be a hard guy to miss, believe me. So he's still around, but I just thought it was interesting that there was this guy who became, he would come to the States and visit. Whenever I'd go over there, I'd visit him. He was a friend, but he also, it's the guy who made me realize maybe you could be a professional horse player. Also made me realize that if you're not careful, that can go away in a real hurry, as it did with him. But it's just one of the great characters I've met in my life, and I always think of him at Cheltenham time, and I wanted to tell you guys that story today.
Nice story, but a bit of a cautionary tale there, certainly from about acting as the book and the exchange wagering side of things.
Well, yeah, you can't. They think of it. I think sometimes guys think of it as like, oh, I'm going to steal a little money by betting against this horse who's beat. But yeah, talk about bet a lot to. It's actually a perfect story with what the wagering topic. I'm talking about value, but at the same time, you can't. I'm not interested in trying to split the difference between a 1 in 100 chance and a 1 in 1,000 chance, really. At a certain point, you just have to say it's not worth the effort.
Yeah. Interesting story, and especially with Cheltenham going on right now, you wonder if you'll ever see anything from the Giant.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's done. I think he's done with betting. I should write him a letter at some point. I think I have an address for him still, and just be like, hey, dude, I get it if you can't hang out with your racing friends. Just want you to know I'm thinking of you, and our friendship, was cool, and have a great life. Just I need some closure, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I tell you what,
sure.
This absolutely reminds me that if for all of the listeners too, if you've been to the racetrack more than your fingers and toes, more than 20 times. You definitely top 5 most interesting people you've ever met have come from that place, and there's no question about it. You just cannot top the characters that are at the racetrack. I mean, I'm thinking about the time, I'm thinking about last weekend at Santa Anita, the 4 or 5 people that I saw that I've seen before that I'm like, oh my gosh, that person is an absolute character and deserves their entire own TV show. And it's, I think that's part of the thing that made all of us fall in love with the place.
No, I think it's a great point. Well, Jonathan, put your thinking cap on. Next few weeks we'll get you doing a tale from the track. It doesn't have to be as long or as rambling as mine, but we want to hear you tell a story about one of these great characters yourself, or something ridiculous or important that happened to you somewhere along the line. And Mike, you might as well cue another one up too for when the time comes. And my plan, if we make this take off as a segment, I think we have a good opportunity at an opportune time, maybe for Saratoga this year, maybe sooner, to get my friend and mentor Harvey Pack on the show to tell a tale from the track, because he's got about 1 million of them.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be awesome.
Guys, any closing thoughts before we send the listeners on their merry way on this Wednesday?
No. Races that are involved, so excited. And then Pete, you're back in studio next week, and we'll maybe have a couple guests and more to be determined. But it's been fun.
Excellent, Jonathan. When are you coming to Santa Anita?
Hours.
Oh, fantastic.
Late tonight, so I'll probably catch you in the morning, I guess.
Yeah, let's sit down and we gotta come up with something for this pick 6. I think. What's the carryover?
580, I think.
That's a nice number. That's a real nice number.
That's a great number. Going into a Thursday, it's those always get a lot of multiples out of them because of just the amount of work people are able to do. I think they can kind of attack it with a little bit more confidence rather than being rushed into it with like one night to handicap.
That's a very good point. The added preparation and just the fact of where we are in the calendar, a lot of things are going to contribute to that being massive. Do we have any special coverage on the site of that carryover, Mike?
I think there's a few articles. I think Matt Bernier, since Brad Free's on vacation, Matt's doing a How I'd Play Santa Anita for the carryover. I think there's been an article previewing it. I've even tweeted out a few angles. If you follow me on Twitter, it's just there's little bits and pieces all, and I'm sure there will be some DRF live posts as well.
And if you don't follow Mike on Twitter, what are you doing? At DRF Formula. Follow him right now.
It's a good day. I think it's going to be fun. I've heard, I'm not Irish obviously, but I've heard it's St. Patrick's Day, so I think that the racetrack will be full of some characters because of that holiday. But then also the tournament starts, basketball, so go ahead and call your racetrack friend to get you a table somewhere where you can kind of control your own little TV. You can watch the big screen for the races, and you can watch, I don't know, whatever, the 1 versus 16 seed on the little TV.
You have no idea how hard I'm biting my tongue not to make a Phil Lynott joke when you make that joke, Jonathan. But I'll explain that one to you later. You're too young to get it, but Hogan knows what it is.
I do. Yep.
Anyway, folks, thanks so much. Thanks to everybody also who participated in the Twitter poll that Mike put up about what aspects of the show you enjoy. We're always looking for feedback. You can always send that our way. I'm at Looms Boldly. Mike is at DRF Formulator, and Jonathan is at UT Big Hair. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back on Friday. May you win all your photos.